grand ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers, laughter echoing from every corner as the city's elite indulged in luxury. Aaron adjusted his cufflinks, his sharp black suit perfectly tailored to his tall frame. Tonight was important. Deals would be made, reputation solidified, and, most importantly, appearances maintained. But the woman at his side was not his wife. Sophia, draped in a crimson gown that hugged her curves, clung to Aaron's arm like a prized possession. Her beauty was undeniable, sleek, polished, and perfectly curated for the evening. She was everything his wife, Evelyn, was not, or so he believed. Evelyn had always been the quiet, reserved type. She did not care for social gatherings or extravagant displays of wealth. She preferred simplicity, something Aaron had once admired but now resented. With every passing year, he had begun to see her as dull, unworthy of the spotlight he desired. So, tonight, he had chosen to bring Sophia instead, believing no one would question his decision. As they walked through the opulent hall, whispers surrounded them, admiration flickering in the eyes of onlookers. Aaron smirked. He had made the right choice until a familiar presence sent a chill down his spine. At the far end of the ballroom, standing under the soft glow of the chandeliers, was Evelyn. But she was not the woman he had left at home. No, this Evelyn was breathtaking. Clad in a midnight blue gown that flowed like water around her, she radiated confidence and grace. Her soft waves framed her delicate face, and the subtle makeup enhanced her natural beauty. A group of men surrounded her, captivated by every word she spoke. Aaron's heart clenched, confusion flooding his mind. How was this possible? How had the woman he had overlooked for years transformed into the most enchanting presence in the room? And, more importantly, why was she here? A slow, knowing smile curled on Evelyn's lips as her eyes met his. And in that moment, Aaron knew. Tonight would not go as he had planned. Aaron's grip on Sophia's waist tightened involuntarily. His confident smirk wavered as Evelyn's presence sent a ripple of unease through him. He had expected her to stay home, invisible, unaware of his little deception. Yet here she was, radiant, poised, and utterly unbothered by his betrayal. Sophia followed his gaze and let out a soft, amused chuckle. "Is that not your wife?" she whispered, leaning in closer, her voice laced with arrogance. "She cleans up well. I almost did not recognize her." Aaron did not respond. He could not. His eyes were glued to Evelyn as she laughed at something one of the men beside her said, her voice a melody that felt unfamiliar to him. When had she started glowing like that? When had she become the kind of woman who could command a room without trying? "Come on," Sophia urged, tugging him toward their table. We should not let her ruin the night. But as they walked past Evelyn, she turned slightly, lifting a champagne glass to her lips, her gaze meeting Aaron's with an unreadable expression. There was no pain in her eyes, no heartbreak, only amusement, as if she knew something he did not. Aaron felt a lump form in his throat. He had wanted her to fade into the background, to be forgotten while he enjoyed the night with his mistress. But now, all he could see was her. And the way she was looking at him made him feel something he had not felt in a long time: uncertainty. Something was wrong, and Aaron was about to find out exactly what it was. Aaron could not focus. The clinking of glasses, the murmurs of admiration directed at him and Sophia, it all faded into a dull hum. His mind was trapped in the enigma of Evelyn. Every time he tried to look away, his eyes betrayed him, drawn back to the woman he had once dismissed as ordinary. She was different tonight, not just in appearance but in presence. The way she carried herself, the way people gravitated toward her, the effortless charm in her laughter. It was unsettling. Evelyn had always been quiet, reserved, content in the shadows of his world, but this woman before him was a mystery he did not recognize. Sophia, sensing his distraction, leaned in closer, her fingers tracing light patterns on his wrist. "Aaron," she purred, "why do you keep staring? Do you regret bringing me?" Her words were meant to be teasing, but there was an edge to them, she had noticed, and that only irritated him further. He forced a smirk. "Do not be ridiculous," he murmured, lifting his glass. "I just did not expect her to be here." And yet, even as he said it, he knew that was not the truth. The real reason for his unease was the look in Evelyn's eyes, that knowing, almost challenging glint, as if she was waiting for something. Then, as if on cue, a well-dressed man approached her, placing a hand gently on her waist. Aaron stiffened. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly charming, the kind of presence that commanded attention, and the way Evelyn turned to him, her lips curving into an intimate smile, made something dark twist in Aaron's gut. Who was he? A chuckle erupted from someone nearby, one of Aaron's business associates. "Ah, that is Daniel Hawthorne," the man remarked, following Aaron's gaze. "Brilliant investor. Owns a chain of luxury resorts across Europe." He took a sip of his drink before adding casually, "He arrived in town a few months ago, and rumor has it he's been quite taken with your wife." Aaron's grip on his glass tightened. His wife. Taken with another man? The thought was absurd, laughable. Evelyn was his, the woman who had always been waiting for him at home, the one he had never worried about losing. But tonight, the way she was looking at Daniel, the way her body subtly leaned toward him, it felt like a reality he was not prepared to face. Sophia smirked, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "Well," she murmured, resting her chin on his shoulder, "this just got interesting." Aaron exhaled sharply, his pulse drumming in his ears. Number. This was not right. Something was happening, something he could not quite grasp yet. But one thing was certain. Evelyn was not the same woman he had taken for granted. And for the first time, he felt the unsettling chill of being on the outside looking in. Aaron could not tear his eyes away from Evelyn and Daniel. The sight of them together, locked in an easy conversation, sent an unfamiliar tightness through his chest. He had never seen Evelyn like this, glowing, confident, completely unfazed by his presence. She was always the woman who lowered her eyes when he spoke, the one who never demanded attention. But tonight she was different, and worse, she did not even spare him a glance. His fingers curled around the stem of his glass, tension rising within him. He told himself it did not matter, that Evelyn's sudden transformation was just an act. Yet, the more he watched, the more uneasy he became. Then, as if the universe was taunting him, Evelyn laughed again, tilting her head slightly toward Daniel. Her delicate fingers brushed against his sleeve, a fleeting touch, yet it burned in Aaron's vision. And Daniel? He looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the room. "Are you going to sit here all night brooding?" Sophia teased, nudging his arm. "Or are you finally realizing you made a mistake?" Aaron's jaw tightened. "Do not be ridiculous," he muttered. But the bitterness in his tone betrayed him. Before Sophia could push further, the host of the event stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue the evening, we have a very special announcement." The chatter in the room hushed. Aaron barely paid attention, his mind still clouded with frustration. But then, the host's next words shattered his composure entirely. "We would like to extend our deepest gratitude to one of tonight's most esteemed guests, a woman whose recent contributions and business ventures have taken the city by storm, a visionary, an entrepreneur, and a name you will all be hearing a lot more of in the future. Please give a warm welcome to Evelyn Sinclair." The room erupted into applause. Aaron froze. "Sinclair?" He turned sharply, watching as Evelyn, his Evelyn, rose gracefully from her seat. She smiled, nodding politely as the spotlight fell on her, every pair of eyes in the room fixated on the woman he had once believed to be insignificant. A murmur swept through the crowd. Investors, CEOs, and business moguls leaned in, intrigued. Aaron's heart pounded. Since when had Evelyn become important? As she stepped forward, taking the microphone with effortless elegance, her gaze finally met Aaron's. And in that moment, he saw it, the quiet triumph in her eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing. And he had never been more unprepared in his life. Aaron's world tilted as he watched Evelyn step onto the stage, her confidence radiating in a way he had never seen before. The woman who once stood in his shadow was now standing in the center of the room, commanding the attention of the city's most powerful figures. Sinclair. The name echoed in his mind like a taunt. He had never questioned why Evelyn kept her maiden name, assuming it was a trivial preference. But now, as she took the microphone with a poised smile, he realized he had never truly known his wife at all. "Thank you." Evelyn's voice rang out, smooth and composed. "It is an honor to be here tonight among such brilliant minds and visionaries." Applause rippled through the audience, and Aaron sat frozen, trying to piece together what was happening. How had she hidden this from him? How had he never known she was someone worth announcing on a stage like this? "As many of you know," Evelyn continued, "I have spent the past few years working on innovative housing projects, creating sustainable communities for families in need. And I am proud to say that with the support of incredible partners," she gestured subtly toward Daniel, who nodded with a proud smirk, "we are launching our most ambitious project yet, a multi-million-dollar initiative that will redefine the future of urban living." Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Investors whispered among themselves, clearly intrigued. Aaron felt his pulse hammer in his throat. A multi-million-dollar initiative? How? When? He had always assumed Evelyn was content in the quiet life of being his wife, a woman without ambition or influence. He had spent years believing she needed him, but standing there, basking in admiration, it was clear she had never needed him at all. Aaron's fingers trembled around his glass as realization hit him like a brutal wave. He was not just witnessing Evelyn's success. He was watching her rise without him. And the way she stood beside Daniel, the way they exchanged knowing glances, made it painfully clear. She had already replaced him. Aaron felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest as the applause thundered around him. Evelyn was no longer the woman he had cast aside, the quiet wife who existed in the background of his life. She was powerful, influential, admired in a way he had never imagined, and worst of all, she was standing beside another man. Sophia, sensing his turmoil, leaned in with a smirk. "You look like you have seen a ghost," she whispered, amusement dancing in her tone. "Did your little housewife just outshine you?" Aaron clenched his jaw. He refused to let anyone see how much this affected him. But deep down, an unsettling truth gnawed at him. He had spent years looking down on Evelyn, believing she was nothing without him. Yet here she was, standing in a position of power while he sat in stunned silence. Evelyn stepped down from the stage, graciously shaking hands with those eager to speak with her. She moved effortlessly through the crowd, radiating a quiet confidence that was almost hypnotic. Then, as if the universe was playing a cruel joke, she turned in his direction. Their eyes met. For a moment, the room around them faded, the noise dimming into the background. Aaron expected to see traces of longing, regret, some sign that she still cared. But there was none. Her gaze was calm, composed, indifferent. That stung more than he cared to admit. Evelyn approached, but she did not stop for him. Instead, she paused beside Sophia, her lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. "I hope you are enjoying the evening," she said, her voice warm yet distant, as if addressing a mere acquaintance. Sophia, taken aback by Evelyn's confidence, forced a sweet yet insincere smile. "Oh, we are," she replied. "Your speech was impressive." Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, tilting her head. "Thank you. Though I must admit, I did not expect to see you here, Aaron." There it was, the subtle challenge in her voice. Aaron forced himself to smirk, masking his unease. "Neither did I. But then again, it seems there is a lot I did not expect tonight." Evelyn raised a perfectly shaped brow. "Yes, I suppose surprises can be enlightening." And with that, she turned away, slipping back into the crowd, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than words. Aaron exhaled slowly, a bitter realization sinking in. She was no longer his wife in the way he had once believed, and for the first time he feared she never would be again. Aaron watched as Evelyn disappeared into the sea of influential guests, her presence lingering like a ghost in his mind. He had walked into this event with confidence, parading Sophia on his arm, believing he was the one in control. But now, the night had flipped on him in a way he never saw coming. He could feel Sophia shifting beside him, growing impatient. "Are we seriously going to spend the whole night obsessing over your wife?" she muttered under her breath, irritation creeping into her tone. His wife. The words struck him harder than he expected, because for the first time he realized Evelyn was no longer just his wife. She was something bigger, something untouchable. A waiter passed by, and Aaron grabbed a glass of whiskey, downing half of it in one go. He needed clarity. He needed answers. Just as he was about to move, a familiar voice stopped him. "Aaron!" He turned, only to come face to face with Daniel Hawthorne. Up close, the man was even more infuriating, charming, confident, and oozing the kind of power Aaron had always prided himself on having. But the worst part? The knowing smirk on his face, as if he understood something Aaron did not. "You have quite the remarkable wife," Daniel said, slipping his hands into his pockets, his voice smooth yet firm. "I was surprised to see you here tonight." Aaron stiffened, his grip tightening around his glass. "And why is that?" Daniel chuckled, tilting his head slightly. "Because Evelyn did not think you would come." He let the words sink in before adding, "She did not think you would care." The words struck like a blade. Aaron's breath hitched, but he masked it with a cold smile. "She thinks a lot of things," he said smoothly, "but she tends to forget that no matter what name she goes by now, she is still my wife." Daniel's smirk deepened, as if he'd been expecting that response. "Ah," he mused, taking a step closer, "but the question is, does she still see herself as your wife?" Aaron felt the slow burn of anger coil in his chest, but before he could respond, Daniel gave him a knowing pat on the shoulder, his voice dropping to a whisper. Be careful, Aaron, he murmured. You might be the only one holding on to something that no longer exists. And with that, Daniel walked away, leaving Aaron standing there, his entire world shifting beneath his feet. Because for the first time, he had to face the terrifying possibility. What if he had already lost Evelyn, and he was the last one to realize it? Aaron's chest tightened as Daniel's words echoed in his mind. You might be the only one holding on to something that no longer exists. Number. That was impossible. Evelyn was still his wife, whether she admitted it or not. She was supposed to be waiting in the background, lingering in his shadow, hoping for his attention, not standing in the spotlight, commanding admiration, and certainly not being whispered about alongside another man. He could not accept it. His jaw clenched as he set his glass down and strode through the crowd. He needed answers, and he needed them now. His pride was screaming, his ego demanding that he put Evelyn back in her place. But beneath it all, a quiet, unsettling fear clawed at him. What if she truly had moved on? He found her near the grand balcony, laughing softly with a group of distinguished investors. She looked radiant under the soft glow of the chandeliers, her confidence effortless. She'd always been beautiful, but tonight she was something more, something untouchable. For the first time, he realized that Evelyn had never needed him to shine. He had simply never allowed himself to see it before. Taking a steady breath, he stepped forward. Evelyn. Her laughter faded, and she turned to him, her expression unreadable. Aaron. Just his name. No warmth, no bitterness. Just an acknowledgement, as if he were nothing more than another guest at the event. It stung more than he expected. The investors, sensing the tension, politely excused themselves, leaving them alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn sighed, tilting her head slightly. What do you want, Aaron? He searched her face, looking for any trace of the woman he had once known, the woman who had waited for him, longed for him. But she was gone, and in her place was someone he no longer recognized. You never told me, he said, his voice quieter than intended, about any of this. Her lips curled slightly, not in amusement, but in something resembling disappointment. Would it have mattered? She asked, folding her arms. Would you have cared? Aaron exhaled sharply. That is not fair. Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. No, Aaron. What is not fair is that you only care now, when you realize I do not need you anymore. The words sliced through him, raw and unforgiving. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. For years, I waited for you to see me, to love me. But I was nothing more than an afterthought to you. And now, because I no longer stand in your shadow, you suddenly want answers? She gave him a look so piercing it made his throat dry. You are not here because you miss me. You are here because you cannot stand the thought of losing control over something you thought belonged to you. Aaron opened his mouth, but no words came, because deep down he knew she was right. Evelyn sighed and glanced past him, her expression unreadable. Enjoy the rest of your night, Aaron. And just like that, she walked away, leaving him standing there, drowning in the realization that for the first time in his life, he was the one who had been left behind. Aaron stood frozen, the weight of Evelyn's words pressing down on him like an iron chain. She had never spoken to him like that before, never with such finality, such unwavering certainty. It unsettled him in ways he could not explain. He had spent years believing he held all the power, that Evelyn would always be there, waiting in the shadows, yearning for his attention. But now, the woman he once dismissed had shattered that illusion. And, what was worse, she did not seem to hate him. She simply no longer cared. The realization clawed at his chest like a slow-burning fire. "Aaron?" He turned sharply to see Sophia watching him with narrowed eyes, her arms crossed. "Are we leaving, or are you going to keep staring at your wife like a lost puppy?" There was venom in her voice, but he barely heard it. Everything about Sophia suddenly felt wrong. Her presence, her touch, even the way she spoke. He had paraded her around tonight, convinced that flaunting another woman at his side would make Evelyn jealous, would make her feel something. But she had not. Instead, he was the one drowning in emotions he never thought he was capable of feeling. Sophia huffed, clearly irritated by his silence. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're acting like—" "I need some air," he muttered, brushing past her before she could finish. He stepped onto the balcony, inhaling deeply as the cool night air hit his skin. He needed to clear his head, to push away the gnawing realization that he had miscalculated everything. But no matter how hard he tried, one thought refused to leave him. He had spent years being ashamed of his wife, and now she was the one who had every reason to be ashamed of him. The doors behind him opened, and he instinctively turned, half expecting Evelyn. But it was not her. It was Daniel. The man strolled forward, taking his time, his expression calm, almost amused. "Rough night?" he asked, leaning casually against the railing. Aaron clenched his fists. "What do you want?" Daniel smirked. "Nothing, really. Just wanted to check in on you." He paused, then added, "I imagine it must be difficult, watching the woman you took for granted become someone you can no longer reach." Aaron's patience snapped. "You think you know everything, do you?" he said coldly. "You think because you stand beside her now, you have won?" Daniel let out a low chuckle. "Aaron," he said, shaking his head, "this is not about winning." He turned to look out at the city skyline, his smirk fading slightly. "Evelyn was never a prize to be claimed. That is where you made your first mistake." Aaron's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to fight back, but deep down, he knew Daniel was right. Because no matter what happened next, the truth was inescapable. Evelyn had already walked away from him, and this time there was no going back. The night stretched on in an agonizing blur as Aaron wandered through the gala, lost in the whirlwind of his own thoughts. He could barely focus on the conversations around him, his mind replaying Evelyn's words over and over again. "You don't care, Aaron. You never did." It was like a constant echo in his head, growing louder with each passing moment. He had spent years wrapped up in his own ambitions, his own ego, never stopping to truly see Evelyn for who she was, or what she had become. Now, standing at the precipice of the life he had built, he realized how far he had fallen, and worse, how little of it mattered. Sophia was beside him, her voice muffled as she spoke, but he barely heard her. His attention was fixed on one thing, and one thing only. Evelyn. Where was she now? What was she doing? The question gnawed at him, a sense of urgency pulling at his chest. He had to know. Without another word to Sophia, Aaron excused himself and made his way toward the exit. The cold air hit him as he stepped outside, but he barely noticed it. His steps quickened as his thoughts raced. He reached his car, but before he could even pull open the door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the usual place. You know where. It's time for you to stop pretending." Aaron froze, the words like a cold slap to his face. He stared at the message, his heart pounding. The usual place? Who was this? But then, like a flash of lightning, it hit him. It was Evelyn. For the first time that night, a small flicker of hope sparked in his chest. She had not completely cut him off. She was giving him a chance to prove something, maybe to make things right. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, Aaron got into his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. The road stretched out in front of him, the city lights blurring past as he drove to the place he had hoped he would never have to visit again. A secluded cafe at the edge of town, a place where they had spent quiet evenings together before everything had changed. Aaron pulled into the parking lot, his heart thudding in his chest. And there she was. Evelyn stood at the entrance, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlight, her back straight and her posture regal. She was no longer the meek woman he had once known. She was powerful. She was beyond him. She did not look at him when he stepped out of the car, but she did not leave either. For a moment, Aaron stood still, unable to move. Then, slowly, Evelyn turned, her eyes meeting his. "Do you remember this place, Aaron?" she asked softly, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I remember." "Good," she said, taking a step toward him, "because you have a choice to make." Aaron's chest tightened. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew this moment would define everything that followed. And as he looked at Evelyn, at the woman who had become a stranger to him, but also the only one who could break him free from the prison of his own making, he understood one undeniable truth. He had lost her, but this was his chance to prove he was willing to fight for whatever was left.